Hello, thank you everyone for your interest on end user feedback. This is our online forums call, and today we're gonna focus on the topic of how to collect end user feedback and how to use it to improve our systems. I'm very excited for the panelists who will introduce shortly. Just a couple housekeeping. We're going to record the call, and then I'm gonna share it so others can view it in our probono.net/LHI page, and it won't require a password to access it. The other thing that I wanted to share is that everybody is muted right now. All our attendees are muted. We're going to open it up for feedback, questions, sharing, and hopefully you'll interact with us. If you put questions on the chat, I'll be monitoring and maybe we'll address them in the middle of the call. If not, raise your hand at the end or put your questions and we'll unmute. We'll try to unmute as many of you as we can and get everybody participating. So we hope to keep it interactive, but right now we have you on mute until we get to that part. But raise your hand if you wanna to get unmuted. So without more, and this is our agenda. Mark is gonna lead us, kind of centering us on the topic and talking about what we're doing it. And then I'm gonna do a very quick overview of how Low Help Interactive creates opportunities and values and user feedback at different levels for form owners and then for the system itself. So I'll share briefly on that, and then we will move to Diana, who's gonna share with us how she uses end user feedback through surveys in California. And then very excited to also hear from Emily Lagrada, which is gonna share her experience on end user feedback in court settings. And then Gwen Daniels is going to share with us how ILAO uses a particular customer feedback tool, Zendesk, which we also use in LHI, to manage end user feedback and then improve the multiple of online tools ILAO makes available, which include forms, but there's a lot more than that. So that's kind of the plan. And then at the end, we'll end up with announcements. So Mark, I'll turn it over to you.
Okay, guys, this is Mark Lauritsen. This is kind of a repetition of what Claudia just said, but this is our call. These are some of the questions we put out in the description of the call. Basically, how can we use various forms of feedback to improve our services? And not only getting feedback, but actually taking it seriously and using it. What are some good and best practices around that? These are our speakers. We're going to begin with Claudia talking about LHI's features. Move to Diana from California about the experience out there. Hear from Emily Lagrada and Gwen Daniels from Illinois Legal Aid, and have time hopefully for questions and reactions at the end. One last slide from me, which is I just threw it together now, but basically when you think about user feedback, it overlaps with user support, right? I mean, user support is designed to help people with use your service and deal with their problems. Along the way, we often get feedback just by virtue of understanding what's not working well for them. Sometimes feedback comes in explicitly from a user who hasn't had any trouble. They just want to suggest good ideas. This all intersects with quality control mechanisms, which may or may not directly involve interacting with users. And finally, of course, the overall agenda of improving services. So there's really these four at least overlapping arenas in which this stuff plays out. And with that, I'm going to stop and give Diana the screen, so make Diana the presenter, and she can show her slides and take us off.
All right, thank you.
Should it come to me first, Mark? Because I just wanted to briefly share how LHI.
Oh, that's right. Claudia, were you going to start?
Yes, you are. I'm sorry, Claudia. Let me make you the presenter, and you can take over. And we're not hearing you.
Hopefully people are looking at the screen. Mark, thanks a lot for that diagram, because I think that that's exactly what we're talking about. is the interaction of formal evaluation processes, but then also technical support when you're working with a platform that's servicing, multiple hundreds or thousands of groups that are using the platform to promote access to justice with thousands of individual, in our case, forms. And then there's also, always listening for quality assurance issues that may be happening either at an individual form level or at a platform level, analyzing trends and looking at the feedback that we're getting to improve the platform and the user experience. So in LHI, our belief is that people should be able to create legal documents that are complete. That's a good experience where they can present fully what they need and what they're seeking from a decision maker, be it a court or a private party or a government agency, anyone that's going to be making decisions. So with that goal, when somebody takes time to type, and our support is all online. We don't have a phone number, which is also an option. We don't have enough resources to have a hotline so it's all done via Zendesk. And Gwen is gonna cover how they use Zendesk at ILAO, but it's valuable. Feedback is valuable. It doesn't matter how or where it comes. And so, for LHI, we have multiple ways in which collecting, monitoring, and then acting, analyzing on end user feedback. And some of it is for the people that are trusting us with their form content. And we make that available to them so that they can collect feedback. And in those cases, for example, for interviews, and Diana is going to cover more on this, she can upload a Survey Monkey for specific forms, and she is the one that gets and receives that end user feedback. LHI doesn't have access to those answers. That is her feedback from her forms, and we don't touch it, but we give an opportunity of create a place in the web page so that people can post those, surveys that then they manage and they get the data and they use that to improve their forms. The other one is that we have a quick feedback feature where the person that uploads the interview to the platform, they get end user feedback to their email account that they use to upload. So generally it's the form owner, the person that contracts, if it's a contract developer. And that end user feedback, we do get a copy of it because sometimes there could be issues that are related to the LHI experience. We control the platform, we don't control the form design. So, but we generally don't respond to those because the feedback is really to the owner. Unless there's something systemic, we may take a look at that. And then within LHI, we have a help feature at the end of the page where people can click and fill out a form to report an issue. And that is very helpful because the form asks for enough information for us to know the details so we can try to troubleshoot. And that goes to a Zendesk tool. And in the year of 2021, we had approximately 4,000 Zendesk tickets, and about 80% of them are simple tickets where we only have to use a canned note or help people with something very, very basic. Now, the rest of the tickets do require diagnosis, and we engage in, more advanced, like asking folks to share answers, reviewing error logs, anything that we can do to figure out, is it the form, is it the software, is it the platform? There are multiple things happening in our architecture. And with those, we may engage the owner of the form. Sometimes it's lack of clarity in instructions, lack of clarity in process. Those are not technical issues, but it's good to share because maybe if there's a new version, it can be improved in the description of what to do next or how to e-file and stuff like that. And sometimes it is technical issues where we find something in a form that's very popular, and so the tickets are coming fast and furious. We work with the owners to support them technically on that. And sometimes it's an issue with our platform. Maybe one of the messages that we have is not clear enough, and we can think of better language so that if the user hits that error message, they will understand better what they need to do to get to where they need to go next in terms of creating the document. So we review the tickets and we tag them by area, and I'm just was gonna show, and we reviewed this quarterly or so. So this is an example, and you can see this goes from January 2020 to July 2021 in the context of the pandemic, which happened March 13th, right? That's when court closures happened. We started noticing an uptick on process questions. How do I e-file? What do I do, um, you know, with this form? And people were, courts are closed, nobody's picking up the phone, I don't know what to do. And we started noticing an uptick on e-filing. And we decided, we're not going to go and automate every form in the state of X or whatever. Our approach was, let's listen, let's see where the shoe is really hurting end users. And it became clear from the inbox that it was on submission to courts, because the people were trying to do domestic violence and like urgent forms where the dockets were still open, but there was no process information out in the world. So we decided to, in 2020, do an email feature that allows the person to program the email into the form so that the end user doesn't have to worry about remembering the email or mistyping the email. And we simplify the way that emails can be sent to organizations in the back end. And when we deployed that in 2020, that feature was deployed in the fall, we immediately saw the decrease of e-filing comments, right? Because a lot of the more popular forms started using that email to court feature that we created on the back end. However, courts were up and down, closing and not going, and e-filing questions continued. And so we then started to promote or encourage partners that have really voluminous forms to use that feature. And when they did, we started seeing the decline again. And so this is an example on how we work with partners, when we see trends and we try to think, okay, if we're going to invest in this national platform, where do we put our technical acumen to help release a really high volume report? But we do this also for other things that are like saving answers or very specific to messaging. And we review this, and a lot of this is used to inform how we put our technical resources in terms of changing the system. So just wanted to show that. I will now turn it over to Diana, who's gonna share with us on her surveys. Hold on.
Great, thank you, Claudia. And if you could let me know whether I'm actually sharing once that happens, because it's the first time I've done this on GoToWebinar.
Okay, there we go.
So I don't yet, oh, there it is. Okay, so let me just see. One's never quite sure if something is screen one or monitor one. Can people see
Yes.
learning from user feedback?
Yep.
Yay. All right, success. Thank you so much, Claudia and Mark, for inviting me to speak today. And it's great to be here with you all and with my co-panelists. I'm just going to talk a little bit. It's brief. Just want to give you kind of an idea of how we're getting the feedback, the types of feedback we're getting, and how we're using it. So, and some of the challenges that are presented with what we have and how we've tried to address those challenges. So first of all, how we get feedback. LHI has a couple of great features on their platform that allow us to get regular feedback. The first is the "was this form helpful?" question at the end of the interviews. We get quite a few of these, and they're usually, 9 times out of 10, there'll be something just lovely. People just say good things, and that's always nice to get in your inbox. But there are some very pointed questions that come across, critiques occasionally, or people just completely lost. And obviously those types of messages are very informative for us and help us make changes. We are allowed to post our own surveys on LHI, and we currently have one at the end of our only direct to public offering at the Judicial Council, which is our name change petition. It is a Google Forms survey, and it's available at the end of that template, at the end of that program. And it's been extremely successful. Hundreds of people have filled it out, and it's garnered a lot of information for us. And finally, because, as I mentioned, we only have the one program that is really designed directly for the public, we get a lot of court, legal aid, and justice partner feedback, because that's really where the bulk of our programs are housed. So they are delivered through workshops or through online assistance, in computer labs at courts. And so we're continually getting feedback from those sources as well. So what kind of feedback are we getting? Was this form helpful is just an open-ended question. We get lots of great qualitative feedback from those surveys. The survey that we have currently as a Google form survey at the end of name change generates both quantitative and qualitative feedback. And finally, from our partners, we're getting qualitative feedback. So let's start with the quantitative. Here are some examples, and I'm not sure how easy it is to read these in terms of size on your screen. But one of the questions that we ask is, what type of device did you use to access this program? This is on our name change petition. We were surprised to find that, as you can see, that orange section there, which is, I think, around 70% of the folks answering that question did so, accessed the program using their desktop computer or laptop. So now 25% are on a smartphone, and I know that we're all working towards being mobile enabled, but this data point was really informative. And what we found when we combined this with some Zendesk data that we received, because we at one point had a live chat feature associated with name change, was that we think people are doing this on their lunch hour. That was the best guess that we could come up with, and likely at work. And then this other question below, how much time did it take you to use the program? Around 70% of our survey respondents indicated less than 30 minutes, which is great. 30 to 60 is the red column. So really there's just a few people for whom it is taking more than 60 minutes. So we kind of watch that number, make sure that, that continues to be the case. And certainly if we find that people are taking longer and longer with it, we would be needing to make adjustments. So this type of quantitative data is really helpful for, number one, justifying our existence. You've got numbers, you've got people coming through saying this is how we're doing things. This last data point here, which it's more of a satisfaction data point, but clearly a large number of people who go through this program are helped very much, or at least somewhat. And we do use it to advocate for features that respond to our user needs and settings. So if, for example, the question around the type of device were flipped and we actually had 70% of people accessing it by smartphone, or, magically something else, that could help inform our conversations with our platform like LHI and with Hot Docs. And we do use some of this to adjust our interviews, but really where we're adjusting interviews is on this qualitative data. So this is an example of some of the qualitative data we've received. The question was there any part of the program that wasn't clear to you? And again, an open-ended question that allows people to answer however they want. And this has really helped us to reframe questions, to get a sense of how plain our language really is. We're always striving for that. We're not always 100% successful. And the other area where this has been tremendously helpful is in both sort of how you triage people in, and then how you give them next steps or the warm handoff to the next thing. Because if people come here and say, now I'm lost, right? So like this very last response, after I clicked finish, I didn't know what my next steps were, right? So that's very clear that we need to build more in, and also work on our interface with folks once they leave the Hot Docs and end up back at LHI and then go on with their paperwork. What is it that they are to do next, and how can they have that information in front of them going forward? So there are some challenges, and one of the major challenges that we have encountered is that sometimes feedback is not about either Hot Docs, and sometimes it's not about LHI. It's about something else altogether, but it's certainly not about something that I can necessarily program a solution for. So, and sadly, a lot of times it's about a judicial council form. As we consider ourselves at the Judicial Council here working with Hot Docs to be kind of a downstream component to the services that we offer statewide. So we are really bound to the form in a lot of ways. Obviously, the benefits of document assembly are about getting away from the form and conveying the form in a way that is plain and easy to understand. But if, for example, there is language on a form that perhaps has not been interpreted by a court, or someone is not willing to tell me what it means and it's not clear to me, that can present challenges for trying to make that plain and understandable. If no one understands it, and it's really not for Deanna Glick to decide and interpret the law. So there are times where the language of our interviews has to more closely align with the language on the form, and that can be very challenging. So sometimes the problem is the form. Sometimes when people provide feedback, it's because they are dissatisfied with the legal requirements, such as the fact that they have to pay a filing fee for a name change, or that they have to publish their name change. And there are a number of local court rules and practices that we've become aware of that can be very difficult for folks to understand or to navigate. There can be erroneous or confusing information out there, either that we are putting out there or that is just generally out on Google. And sometimes there's an issue with LHI, and sometimes there's an issue with the Hot Docs interface. So as much fun as it is to be able to say, well, that's not my problem, not my fault, actually then that does present the challenge of what do we do? What do we do when we get feedback like this? When we get feedback that's very clearly directed at something that's within my sphere of control, I try to do something about it as quickly as possible, but that doesn't always happen. So how do we address challenges like that? Well, we have a dance party because we're California, right? Actually, no, this is the scene from the room where it happens. And so I would characterize our efforts around feedback received that is not directly in our sphere of influence. I would say that the way we have tried to address that in California is that we have tried to be in the room where it happens, and we have tried to become more involved upstream. That means becoming more involved with web content and how that is produced, becoming more involved with the forms in terms of what is their substantive content when they get approved by the Judicial Council, what's coming, downstream towards me, how is that looking? And not only the substantive content, but then how is that form produced for the public? What kinds of accessibility features are placed on it? How are decisions made about getting it translated? All of those things impact ultimately the type of form that I'm getting that I then have to make into a document assembly program and make it work. And I would say that communication in all ways is going to help. And I would say that communication really needs to be ongoing and iterative. Just as an example of that, when I first started working at the Judicial Council about 7 years ago, there had been already discussion about how, hey, form authors, when you guys are making your forms, could you not create a question where somebody has to circle it on a piece of paper? That's problematic for a number of reasons. But it's particularly problematic if we want to enable that form in the document assembly program, because Hot Docs just doesn't allow us to apply circles onto forms. And so it seemed like a settled question, and yet very recently, within the last year, there has been turnover, there have been new ideas come forward, new people come forward, and everybody's got great inspiration. But that idea came up again, let's make a form where you circle something. And it was like, no, so it just has to keep going on. The communication has to be constant. And that's how we really find that we are able to take that user feedback that we receive and try to get it to have some impact upstream, because ultimately that benefits us downstream as well and benefits our end users. So with that, I think I'm handing this over to someone else, and I believe we're doing questions at the end.
Yes, that's correct, Deanna. Thank you.
Okay. Yeah.
I can switch it to Emily, who's going to speak next. And while we're transitioning, there was a comment by Caroline Robinson in the chat saying, hey, why do we need to ask users in a survey about what kind of devices they're using isn't that information available automatically on the site? I think I know the answer, but I'm curious, Deanna, whether you've thought about that aspect.
Oh, available on LHI?
Yeah.
Or, if it is, I did not realize. So thank you, Caroline.
Well, I know it's available to the central administrators at LHI. I'm not sure it's available to content providers directly. So that's a topic we can take offline.
We have a report that owners can look at. It's the quarterly report, and it's by device, and so they have access to that way. It's generalizable. What device an individual is on, we consider confidential, right? Because look at our terms of service, right? So we make the report, and you can take a look at that and see what your users are using. We can create custom reports for people who subscribe to LHI. So if anybody wants to explore that, you can reach out to me. But it's not something that, like, we're not giving you device by user on a
Sure.
routine basis. We have a general anonymized quarterly report, and that hopefully will help you understand that. And then we could do more in-depth work with you, but we always have to, we promise our end users that we're not going to share any of their personal information with third parties. So we have to respect that.
Okay. Emily, you have the floor.
Great. Thank you, everyone, or good morning for the West Coast folks. I think I have about 10 minutes to try to share some of the things I've been working on this topic. So my apologies in advance for rushing, but I'm eager to follow up with interested folks afterwards. And my kids are home today, so my apologies in advance if I have any, either of them crashes this in the next 10 minutes. So I'm Emily Lagrada. I'm a lawyer based in New York City. Kind of grew up in the criminal court space. And in doing so, I landed on a topic called procedural justice or procedural fairness. That's really become the emphasis of my work the past dozen years or so. And so it's that background that led me to this. So that felt relevant to share. So essentially, I try to get courts and other justice agencies to think critically about how they're performing from the public's perspective, which is essentially what procedural justice offers as a concept. Is kind of justice from the human perspective. And so one of the questions I often ask courts or whomever is sort of, well, how do you want the public to describe you, right? Like, what ideals do you want to come forward? And inevitably, no matter what audience I ask, I usually get some mix of these types of words. So, fairness is often a top value. We want the courts to seem respectful and even-handed and equitable, et cetera. And so the challenge, or one of the challenges in helping courts and other agencies sort of advance these ideals is how do they know if they're getting any better at it? Of course, professionals can attempt to self-assess whether they're getting better, but that's a pretty faulty measure. And so it was that question that led me to try to experiment with some courts and other agencies on how we might measure that. And there were all kinds of challenges, which I'm sure this audience can easily guess. But I wanted to figure out if there was a way that we could, prepare courts to do this as sort of not just a once every 10-year, kind of large study, but something that was more just like a business practice. Like we're gonna measure if we're delivering on fairness. And so I guess just by other way of background, for those who haven't seen these results, if we think about trust levels or perceptions of fairness in our courts, the data is not very encouraging right now. So the National Center for State Courts conducts a public opinion poll every year. And they ask questions like, do you have trust and confidence in different, legal authorities? And unfortunately, our current levels, as of the most recent one in 2021, is that the confidence ratings are the lowest they've been since the National Center began asking. And I think that probably matches our sense of what is happening in our profession. That, you know, confidence in policing is certainly down, but confidence in courts is down as well, and in fact at a level that's even lower than policing. And so the impact that has when you look at things like, you know, you have one of the questions in the poll is, you know, do you think state courts are fair and impartial? So that's that value that so many court professionals, you know, want to have come through. Only about half of the general public in these polls say yes. And you could imagine that people who are actually using our courts more frequently may have an even lower rating of that. So these are pretty, you know, damning numbers, which I hope, you know, help make the case that we should be thinking about ways that we can elevate trust in these institutions in really meaningful ways. And so that gets us, you know, back to this procedural fairness framework, or procedural justice, as it's also known, which tells us how to do this, right? So all this research on procedural fairness kind of gives us the ingredients, the most common dimensions that are associated with people feeling like they trust courts or any authority. And so it's a bit of a, it's like a self-fulfilling argument a bit, in that we want to measure fairness. And lo and behold, one of the ways that you build fairness is that you give people a voice. So it seemed like a natural path to, or like almost like a double strength argument to say, let's invest in this idea of trying to give more voice to court users. It's going to give courts a feedback loop, but along the way, we might actually build some trust as well. Okay, so the status quo was that very few courts had mechanisms for collecting feedback. The ones that did have mechanisms, you know, I heard all kinds of frustrations and disappointment in those methods, whether it was paper surveys or, you know, the comment card box where somebody lost the key to the padlock, you know, some number of years ago. And so it seemed like we needed other methods, and of course, you know, in this day and age, there are just countless tools now available, you know, coming out of you know, technology companies helping for-profit organizations, but also increasingly so government, to do just this, right? To kind of to get feedback from folks. And so what I've helped to lead over the past couple of years are a couple of broad pilot efforts where courts who are interested in this idea and kind of open to collecting feedback tested a variety of methods of hearing directly from court users. So the first was back in 2020, slated to launch April 1st of 2020, which we all remember what that felt like. But we were able to move forward with it that summer. Some municipal courts spread around Texas. And then most recently, we just ended a national pilot project using similar feedback methods at varying types of courts around the country. And so I have a link here on the screen, and I can put it in the chat, but the Texas project has a toolkit which has more detail on the things I'm rushing through right now. And then the national project, the report will be out by the end of the month. So again, kind of another layer of detail on that. But effectively, we've now heard from, you know, tested these methods and heard from, you know, thousands of court users on these topics. And so I guess I would frame, you know, just to boil this down, I think there were sort of two main innovations of this work. So one was trying to come up with, like, well, how do you get feedback? And so the challenge that I had is that I wanted to make sure it was very easy for overworked court leaders, so low burden. It needed to be inexpensive, and it also needed to be flexible. So I was, you know, part of my encouragement for working on this was seeing those smiley face kiosks pop up all over the place, airports, taxi lines, etc. But I knew that a smiley face was not the right emoji for most court contexts, and so I needed some kind of platform that would be flexible. We did end up testing a variety of contexts. So as you can see, there was this sort of like iPad stand idea where, you know, a sort of hopefully attractive and easy question could just grab someone's attention. They answer one question, and even if they walk off after that, we've at least grabbed, you know, one little bit of feedback. The kind of middle image there is something that we actually embedded into court staff email signatures. So for courts where there's staff that are directly interfacing with the public, answering questions, providing forms, this kind of one-click format grabbed feedback just based on where they clicked, right? And so it's a subtle difference to things that we've all seen, which is sort of click here to provide your feedback. Just saving that one step of kind of clicking into a longer survey dramatically increased our response rates. And so other things, you know, we tried to boost response rates by putting up signage. We tried QR codes. You're welcome as I'm talking to try out this QR code, right? Where it just sort of links to a simple, you know, a simple survey of sorts. But what we were really trying to prioritize here is get high volume feedback on about 2 or 3 questions. So we didn't want something that looked like a daunting investment of time to the court user, but rather something that in literally seconds, they can give their quick read on what their experience was like. And so we were embedding those in, you know, all these kind of different contexts. Oops, excuse me. So like Deanna was saying, you know, we experimented with both closed-ended and open-ended questions. There were different formats. We tried to get at kind of dimensions of procedural fairness or fairness that they may have experienced. We asked about, in a closed-ended way, you know, kind of needed improvements in the court. But we also asked, most courts gained comfort with just having this open-ended, you know, how could we improve our service? And again, like in the results that were just presented, we got a whole range of things, most of which were either positive or at least kind of specifically, you know, constructive criticism or input about how courts might improve, which really debunked the myth, right, that it was going to be primarily negative or frankly not that useful. So I'm really rushing now, but I wanted to just share a couple of, I would characterize the kind of second innovation as like, what are we going to do with it once we get this feedback? So how do we put the feedback to work? And remember, we already feel like there was benefit in asking, right? By giving voice to court users in this way, perhaps courts were working to build trust. But additionally, so, you know, by asking about dimensions of fairness or experiences of fairness, the idea is to help courts actually assess on those core values and objectives. So that was one big one. And so at least in our initial Texas municipal court study, they were actually very, you know, very high and varied slightly by context, which is an interesting nuance that's worth kind of exploring. The other is a lot of the open-ended feedback that came in, court leaders realized was a great way to assess staff performance, primarily in the positive way. So, you know, I got my first violation, which is really embarrassing, and so helped me out with no judgment. Speaking of someone who was working a window area. So this is really, you know, the type of you know, quality feedback that we've heard from court staff is really otherwise kind of goes unseen. And so was something that court leaders could really value. And so last but not least, I just wanted to flag that, especially in this most recent pilot, we were able to test kind of how feedback could be used directly to inform policy and practice. And so the Court Voices project wanted to examine or use court feedback to get input on pandemic responses, right? It's everybody's favorite topic these days. And so just as sort of a little teaser here, and there's more in the URL I have at the bottom of the screen here, but The question posed is, among our pilot sites, what percentage of court users prefer in-person hearings over remote hearings? Is it 75%, 50, 33%, or 15? And what our court user feedback told us is that this is a trick question, because at our pilots, there was at least one pilot site that represented each of these answers. So to me, this just underscores the value in having local feedback. When we look at things on the aggregate or on a national scale or even state level, right? We're losing nuance. It's going to help court leaders make decisions about, what services they're providing and to whom. And so very helpful. And we saw similarly kind of disparate results when we asked about preferred mode of kind of remote attendance options as well. So I'll wrap up here. I think I went over anyway, despite my rushing, but please reach out by email or LinkedIn, and I'm happy to follow up.
Thank you so much, Emily. Sorry for the short time slot here. Folks may know that I included a link to a full-length presentation by Emily in the announcement of this event, and I think she's going to put some links in her in the chat to some of these other things she referred to. So let me turn it now to Gwen. Gwen, I'm making you presenter, and you can wrap us up, and then hopefully we'll have time to talk a little more.
Okay. So yeah, I'm Gwen Daniels. I'm the Deputy Director at Illinois Legal Aid Online. How do I do this? Okay. Like most of you, we get feedback from a lot of different channels. This includes the form feedback that we get from LHI for our easy forms, automated documents, from email from our partners and even staff. We have a contact us form on every page of the website that encourages people to tell us what they think. We also use surveys, both over using tools like Jotform and SurveyMonkey, but also over SMS using Twilio, and of course, just anecdotal feedback that we get in person on the phone or virtual conversations. So when we moved to Drupal 8 a couple of years ago, we migrated to Zendesk so that we could standardize keeping all of our feedback across all the channels in one place and have somebody on the staff who is responsible for owning that feedback, as opposed to, Matt Neisted owning the active feedback and our product support manager being responsible for stuff from the website, and our online triage and intake system manager being responsible for another area of feedback. Instead, our full-time product support manager is responsible for ensuring that all feedback gets into Zendesk, and then she responds as needed to the pieces of feedback that we get. Doing this approach allows us to save a lot of time, particularly when we have to do grant reports and grant proposals where we need to have positive feedback. We also use it to improve our services, and it helps us keep track of problems as they come in. And this is just a screenshot here of what our Zendesk report looks like. You can see the subject, who sent it in, when they sent it in, and we can then go in and reply to a Zendesk ticket, and we'll send an automatic email and keep a record of it. We can also go in, because we've integrated it with our Jira task management system, it will go in and we can go in, and Carla, who's our product support manager, will go in and create a ticket for me on if it's a technology issue, or for the content team if it's a content issue, so that we know that we need to go in and fix something. So why Zendesk? We went with Zendesk, even though it's not a free product, because it allowed us to put everything together. We have an auto forward set up on the email account that gets the LHI form feedback mail. It automatically creates a copy of it, sends it to Zendesk, which creates an automatic ticket. The contact us form on our website automatically populate in Zendesk via their API. We have a support email that allows all the staff to draft an email that automatically creates a Zendesk ticket. This is a really, really handy thing to do for staff that doesn't want to take the time to go fill out the contact us form, or oh, something pops up in the middle in the moment, and it's just quicker to jot off a quick email or forward an email that we get from somebody else. So that's been really helpful. And finally, using Zapier, we're able to integrate things like our Twilio survey responses that go into a Google Sheet. If I go into that Google Sheet and mark positive or negative next to a survey result, it will then automatically create a positive or negative feedback ticket in Zendesk, so that everything gets centralized. So what do we do with all this feedback? Well, every month, Carla creates 2 reports that she shares with the staff. One is called the positive feedback report, and that tells us all the good things that people are saying about us. And then there's the one I like best, which is the negative feedback report, because that lets me see trends and potential issues. You know, if one person says, I couldn't get this to work, okay, I'll take a look at it. But if I see something, and we had this happen early on with some of the way Live Help had been implemented, where we had 50 pieces of feedback saying I can't get back to my chat once the end of the chat survey pops up, and so we were able to make some adjustments there. And like I said, Carla also, she responds to every single ticket. We average about between 200 and 250 a month. She'll follow up with anybody who's looking for legal help. She'll send them to our Get Legal Help, or she'll try to find an article that is relevant to their question. She will create tickets in Jira when she finds when somebody reports a content bug or an idea, or a technical bug, and then the rest of our program staff is able to go and address the ticket in Jira, and it automatically updates it then in Zendesk, so that Carla knows when we've completed something, so she can follow up with the user. Yeah, and I can really quickly exit out of this and give you a quick peek of, so this is a slightly filtered view of our positive feedback. I hid column B because I had individual email addresses of users who have responded. And you can see where it's got a number, that means it's a Zendesk ticket, originated as a Zendesk ticket, so through the contact us form. If it came from our Live Help platform, which is where we get a lot of feedback. We also get stuff from our from various other sources. Yeah, and if anyone wants a more detailed tour of Zendesk, just reach out to me, and I'll set something up with Carla. She wasn't available for this training, but yeah, that's all I've got, Mark.
Cool. Thank you, Gwen. And I think as Claudia pointed out near the beginning, the Law Help Interactive team uses both Zendesk and Jira. Doesn't use Twilio and some of the other in Zapier and things you mentioned. So there's room for learning. We now have time for some general conversation. I'm going to first give the panel a chance to ask each other questions or make comments. Any panelists want to say anything to add to your remarks or react to other things you've heard from other people?
I'm just so impressed with what everyone's doing. It's really great to hear. This is Deanna.
Yes.
Same, I'll echo that. Thank you all so much.
There's a lot of overlapping ideas, but also new ideas and opportunities.
Yeah, and I echo. I mean, I'm loving all the different tools and techniques that everybody's using, and then how people are working on that with that feedback to do things better from either from a systems or an individual or a form, individual tool perspective. So if anybody wants to look at our Zendesk too, I'm happy to share maybe when you and I could do something together, because I think the more people you're serving, like if you're having 1 million people or, helping 3 million people, the more systemic you need to get. So I'm very interested in learning about Zapier, for example, but I'm also really interested in emoticons. And I don't know if others are using emoticons to solicit, and, like Emily shared the hands, thumbs up, thumbs down. I don't know if others are using similar, just really simple, happy, sad type things.
Anyone in the audience who cares to answer, feel free to raise your hand, make yourself known. I'm going to take the liberty of unmuting Jessica Frank from Cali, because I know she's got some good tools inside of the A to J environment, which is a big part of Law Help Interactive. Jessica, if you're hearing me, I unmuted you. Go ahead. You got the floor.
Thank you. So yeah, within A to J Author, we have a send feedback option. So if authors want to enable that, they can do that in the About section of the interview. You just have to click a little checkbox, and then you include an email address where you want that feedback to go to. And then if you enable it in your interview, in the top right corner, it will give a button that in every interview that says send feedback. The user gets, if they click on that, gets taken to a little web form that they can fill out. They can optionally put in their email address. There's a little drop down of like, I have a problem, I want to thank you, there's a couple options for them to choose from. And then there's a little section where they can give open feedback. And we get a couple dozen of those every week that come to the author and then also come to our team. Like Claudia said, most of the time the feedback is related to the form, so I don't interact with it at all, but it is really good to get both positive and negative feedback about the forms. I use it for our Feedback Friday on Twitter to sort of publicize and show what good work we are doing in the community.
Yeah.
But that option is always available in A to J Author.
That's a good reminder of another use for feedback, which is to promote the good things you're doing.
Right, it shows your funders too. I mean, it's a small circle on Twitter, but you can amplify your impact and show that spending money on document assembly is worthwhile and appreciated by the people who are out there, which isn't something that maybe is always known out in the world.
And I unmuted John because he posted a real excellent question on the chat. And John it's with Callie also. So John, do you want to ask your question and see what others in the community think? I think he's self-muted.
Here we go. Am I unmuted now?
Yes.
Excellent. So in all these presentations, or in so many of these presentations, people are like, well, we don't want to bother people too much because they won't answer. We don't have a lot of money. We don't have a lot of time. We're trying to squeeze this in. And I thought, there's another end to this equation. It's like, well, what if you had infinite money and all the time in the world to get the best possible feedback you could? I mean, what would that look like? Because maybe that's not, because I don't know. I'll leave that as the question. What if you had $1 million in infinite staff? Or how would you design the feedback?
I love that question. So thank you for posing it. I mean, you're exposing sort of I'll say that from my perspective, where there wasn't even a digital platform that we could use to invite feedback, right? We were trying to think pre-pandemic, how might courts, have these opportunities for input. And I think we couldn't even get to your question to dream about the best way, because we were still making a case that courts should get feedback, right? It was like,
yes,
why you might bother to commit any dollars, let alone, endless resources. And I think I've seen over the past couple of years, both as, social justice conversations are raging at new levels, and, the questions that the pandemic posed to all of us, I think it's now kind of a shorter discussion as to why we might do this. And so it is really exciting to think about, like, okay, if we are all in agreement that this would be really valuable, then, you know, let's dream big about all the ways in which we could put this, you know, to work. So my one reaction I had to my panelists, which is sort of tied to this, is just one of the things we wanted to isolate by asking in different contexts is making sure, like, if you only ask people on Zoom what they thought about Zoom, you are inherently getting the people who figured it out enough to show up and then, you know, last long enough to click on the link at the end. And so in places where we were able to, you know, ask in the courthouse lobby and ask in Zoom and ask in the email signature and right, all these different inputs, and then compare how the feedback differed across those different contexts, it was pretty scalable and not that expensive, but that starts to look like my version of the dream of like that we're really hearing from all those folks, including somehow the people who never even made it to any of those contact points, right? The people
Yep,
who
that's
didn't
called
make it to
survivorship bias.
Survivorship bias.
You know, if you only, well, it's a word. Look it up. It's a Wikipedia thing. The planes would come back with bullet holes, and they would say, "Look, we got to put more armor where all those bullet holes are," not realizing that the planes that did come back had bullet holes in other places, like the engine and the fuel tank and the pilot and stuff like that. So if all you ask is the people who successfully fill out a form or have a positive experience in court, you know, then you're not going to get real feedback.
Excellent points. Folks, it's at the top of the hour. We need to wrap up. Claudia, feel free to make any closing remarks. I wanted to thank our panel and our attendees. And we definitely have to follow up. Maybe a next call can be, what are we going to do when we have unlimited resources and staff? But Claudia, back over to you.
Yeah, and I think the diagram that Mark shared at the beginning, you know, quality assurance, tech support, feedback, it's the four interlapping areas. The larger your services, the more need you have to be systemic about collecting feedback. And what Emily said too about having multiple doors to feedback, right? So even your donations are a symbol of support. Always allow for feedback, comments, open box from anything that's coming in from the public, because all of those channels will reach different audiences and communities. And the more you have, the more you can do to improve your services. My only announcement is that I'm going to be posting in the multiple list soon, is that we're going to be doing with Cali Capstone the annual developer survey, which is the annual developer online training that will start on September 28th and we'll go for 8 weeks with homework check-ins every Wednesday through November 15th. So I'll be sharing that. It's an inverse classroom type training where people will do the training week to week on their own, and then we'll be checking in for homeworks. And so that will be announced shortly. So hope some of you who have not worked with online forums and are interested in seeing if LHI can be your platform provider, I would encourage all of you to sign up, and it is online. So if you want to bring 2 or 3 people from your program to have a little cohort, that's always welcome. So that's it. I want to thank all the panelists and everybody that chatted and asked questions, and hopefully I will be putting the recording in the probono.net/LHI page, community training, so it won't be behind password. And then the materials will also be hosted, the presentations that we share. And so thank you, everyone. Always so happy to hear from the end users and how everybody's putting attention to that.
Sounds good. Take care, everybody.
Thank you.